The first thing they told us on Nharis was simple enough to remember and impossible to misunderstand. Do not touch the Queen. They wrote it on the black glass walls of the arrival chamber in 12 languages. They stitched it into our contract. Clauses. They drilled it into us during quarantine orientation while our bones still ached from atmospheric adjustment and our ears still rang from the planet's strange low hum. Do not touch the Queen, not her attendants, not the silk that trailed behind her, not the silver platform she stood upon, and under no circumstance, under any law, under any emergency, were human hands to touch the body of the alien Queen. The punishment listed in the treaty was one word long: death. At first I thought it was ceremonial exaggeration. Every old empire has rules like that, ritual threats wrapped around fragile pride. Back on Earth, kings once had laws about eye contact, posture, distance, breath. This felt like the same kind of theater, just dressed in starlight and diplomacy. I was wrong. The first man who laughed at the rule never made it out of the palace district. He was a freight liaison from Ganymede, broad-shouldered and loud, the kind of man who believed all cultures eventually bent to confidence. One of the Queen's lesser attendants brushed past him in the negotiation corridor. The silk on her sleeve touched his wrist. Smiling, he pinched the fabric between two fingers and said something stupid about how soft it was. He died before the sentence translator finished speaking, not by execution chamber, not by firing line. The guards opened him, cleanly, publicly, efficiently. After that, nobody laughed anymore. By the time I met her, everyone on Nharis knew the law was real, and by the time I touched her, I knew exactly what it would cost me. My name is Elias Vane, and I was not important enough to be remembered by history before that day. I was 36 years old, born in the Rust Belt arcologies outside New Glasgow, Earth Sector North. My father welded oxygen towers. My mother repaired diesel processors. I grew up in the practical middle of humanity, the anonymous millions who kept civilization running while prettier people gave speeches about it. I was not a soldier. Not exactly. I had served 4 years in colonial security on the Rim. Enough to learn how to stay calm under pressure and how to tell when something wanted to kill me. After that, I took contract work, escort duty, logistics security, diplomatic perimeter management, boring jobs, reliable jobs, jobs that paid enough to keep my younger sister in medical school and my mother's lungs functioning. That was how I ended up on Nharis. Officially, I was attached to the human delegation as a security compliance specialist. In simpler words, I stood near important people and made sure nobody did anything catastrophically stupid. Nharis was not like Earth. It was older in ways Earth never could be. Its cities were grown, not built. Vast spirals of mineral lace and living crystal that rose from the desert like frozen music. The air smelled faintly of rain and metal. At night, the sky burned violet, and the moons moved so close and bright it felt like the universe was leaning down to watch. The Nharis were worse. Beautiful, in the way dangerous things often are. Tall, pale, graceful beyond comfort. They moved like they had never once stumbled in their lives. Their faces were almost human if you looked too quickly. 2 eyes, a mouth, elegant symmetry. But the details were wrong in the places that mattered. Their eyes held too much reflective silver. Their fingers bent one joint too many. Their voices carried layered harmonics that made every sentence sound like more than one person was speaking. And their queen. No description I give you will be enough. She was not merely beautiful. Beauty is too small a word for what she was. She was presence, made flesh. The first time I saw her enter the Hall of Tides, every human in the room stopped breathing at once. She was taller than I expected, draped in black, iridescent silk that shifted like oil on water. Her crown was not metal but living crystal grown through silver-white hair. Her skin held the soft luminescence of moonlit stone. The attendants moved around her like orbiting stars, but the eye never stayed on them long. It returned to her, always. Not because she demanded attention. Because something in you surrendered it willingly. Queen Serakhti, of Nharis living sovereign, genetic matriarch. Final authority of 13 moon systems. Death to any foreign hand that touched her. I remember thinking she looked lonely. It was an absurd thought. Treasonously human. But I thought it anyway. The first time she noticed me, I was standing beside Ambassador Holt during the 3rd trade convocation. Holt was speaking. Or trying to. He was sweating through his collar while presenting revised helium tariffs to a room full of beings who had considered human civilization an amusing adolescent experiment until roughly 20 years earlier. I stood behind him, silent, and still, watching the room the way I'd been paid to do. The Queen was listening from her elevated platform, one hand resting against the arm of her throne. Her face was unreadable in the way only royals and predators manage. Then her eyes moved. Not to Holt. To me. There is no graceful way to describe what it feels like when the most dangerous woman in 3 systems turns her full attention on you. It felt like being measured. Not visually. Not socially. Biologically. Like she was reading my pulse through skin and cloth and bone. Her gaze held mine for perhaps 2 seconds. Then she looked away. The moment passed. But later, one of her attendants approached our delegation chambers and delivered a message sealed in silver resin. The Queen had requested the human security officer present at the next audience. Not the ambassador. Not the cultural liaison. Me, Holt, thought it was a political maneuver. Our xenologist thought it was curiosity. One of the junior aides thought I was about to be dissected. I thought all 3 were possible. Still, protocol was protocol. So the next evening, I entered the private court of Queen Serakhti alone. The private court was quieter than the public halls. No ministers, no translators, no spectacle. Only her. She stood near an open arch of living crystal, looking out over the violet dunes beyond the palace. Wind moved through the chamber, carrying strands of silver hair across one bare shoulder. No crown tonight. No attendants. No throne, just the Queen. Alone enough to seem almost mortal. "You are not afraid of me," she said without turning. Her voice in private was lower than in court. Less ceremonial, stranger, more intimate. "I'm afraid of lots of things," I said. "I'm just trained not to show it." That made her glance at me. There was something almost amused in her expression. "Honest," she said. "Unusual. I've been called worse." That somehow was the wrong thing and the right thing all at once. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough to feel dangerous. She asked me questions then, not diplomatic ones, human ones. Did we miss our dead? Why did humans touch each other so often? Was it true human children slept better hearing a heartbeat? Did grief alter our scent? Why did human soldiers joke before battle? Why did we laugh when afraid? No ambassador had prepared me for that kind of conversation. So I answered honestly. Because dead people leave shapes behind in the living. Because touch reminds us we are not alone. Because children need proof someone remains near in the dark. Because grief changes everything. Because fear sounds smaller when mocked. She listened with the stillness of deep water, and when she finally spoke again, her voice had changed. "Your species survives by intimacy," she said. I frowned. That's one way to put it. It is the only way to put it. Then she looked at her own hands. Long, elegant, terrible hands. "On Nharis," she said, "touch is not comfort. It is claim, dominion, consumption. To touch the sovereign body is to challenge divine hierarchy." I understood then, not just the law, the loneliness. No one touched the Queen because touch, to her people, was violence unless sanctified by blood. No hand held hers in comfort. No one brushed grief from her face. No one reached for her without fear. I do not know what expression crossed mine then, but she saw it. and for one dangerous second, something open and unbearably tired moved behind her eyes. Then the mask returned. The audience ended. I left knowing two things I should never have known. The Queen of Nharis was the most protected being I'd ever seen, and she was profoundly alone. I began seeing her more often after that, always officially, always within protocol. Sometimes she summoned me under pretense of human behavioral inquiry. Sometimes she requested my presence during negotiations where my actual purpose seemed incidental. Sometimes she simply asked questions no diplomat could answer because diplomats are trained to represent humanity, not confess it. She asked what rain felt like on unprotected skin. I told her. She asked why humans kissed their dead. I told her that too. She asked if all loneliness on Earth felt as loud as hers. That one took me longer. Over time, I learned her silences. Learned when the stillness in her face meant calculation and when it meant exhaustion. Learned the subtle flattening of her voice when court had drained her. Learned she dismissed everyone 2 minutes earlier than necessary when she was in pain. She learned me too. That I counted exits unconsciously. That I rolled my left shoulder when tense. That I lied more politely than convincingly. That I missed Earth in ugly, physical ways. The smell of wet concrete, engine grease, ocean wind through industrial steel. Somewhere in those conversations, formality eroded. Not recklessly, not all at once. Just enough to become dangerous. She began calling me Elias. I began forgetting to call her Your Majesty when we were alone. That should have been warning enough. It was not. The assassination attempt came on the 72nd day of the convocation cycle. Of course it did. History rarely waits for convenient timing. The Hall of Tides was full. Delegates, attendants, military advisors, trade ministers, enough power gathered in one room to destabilize half a sector if it spilled wrong. I was positioned below the eastern colonnade when the lights changed. Not dimmed. Changed. A fractional flicker in the crystal lattice overhead. Too brief for civilians to notice, long enough for trained instincts to start screaming. I turned toward the Queen. 3 things happened at once. A Nharis minister rose. Too quickly, the western balcony shattered outward, and the Queen's nearest attendant drove a blade toward her spine. People imagine assassinations as chaos. Real violence is precision. The blade was bone white and moving fast. The balcony breach was distraction. The minister was signal coordination. Professionals. I was already moving. I shot the attendant first. Close distance. Hit the platform as the second attacker emerged from the shattered western glass. Then the room became noise. Gunfire. Screaming. Crystal rupture. Guards collapsing into formation. I remember the Queen standing perfectly still in the center of it, not frozen, calculating. A third attacker had infiltrated closer than anyone realized, too close. He came from beneath the platform itself, driving upward with something black and serrated in his hand. I was between them before thought caught up. The blade meant for her went through me. High right abdomen. Hot. Deep. I killed him anyway. There are moments the body simplifies everything. Pain becomes math. Motion becomes instinct. Survival narrows to sequence. Neutralize threat. Reassess. Breathe later. I remember dropping to one knee. Remember blood on the white crystal floor. Remember guards swarming too late. And I remember her, not the Queen. Her. At my side before protocol could stop her. Eyes wide, silver and furious and afraid. She said, "My name once, just once." Then the toxin hit her, not from the blade in me, from the weapon he had nearly buried in her. A dispersal charge ruptured against the platform, releasing a fine black aerosol across the air between us, designed for Nharis biology. Her guards realized it a second too late. She staggered. One hand caught the edge of the throne dais. Then, she fell. Panic in royal chambers is quieter than you'd think. It sounds like people trying not to scream. The physicians came fast, too precise. Masks, scanners, shouted harmonics. I was dragged backward, bleeding through my hands, while the queen convulsed on the crystal floor. The toxin was tailored. Neurological cascade, muscular seizure, respiratory lock. The physicians could slow it, not stop it. One of them said the word terminal. Another said there was no viable intervention without direct neural stabilization. Then all of them hesitated, because the only stabilization method required contact. Sustained physical contact across the cranial nerve lattice and thoracic resonance points. Touch, direct touch, on the queen. No one moved. Even dying, Law stood, in the room like another living thing. No foreign hand may touch the sovereign body. Death. The physicians looked at one another. The guards looked at the floor. The ministers looked terrified of history. And Queen Serakhti was dying in front of all of them because their sacred law had cornered them into obedience. I do not remember deciding. I remember understanding, then moving. They shouted when I crossed the floor. Someone grabbed for me. I tore free. One guard actually drew his weapon. I think I told him to shoot me later. Then I was on my knees beside her. She was barely conscious, breathing in broken, shallow pulls, skin burning beneath the strange, pale light. And every person in that chamber knew what would happen to me if I did what I was about to do. I knew it too. She looked at me through the seizure tremors, and for one raw second she was not queen, not sovereign, not divine architecture wrapped in law. She was only a woman in mortal pain. So I took her hand. The room stopped. I can still feel it. Her skin was warmer than I expected. Softer, too. Her fingers spasmed hard around mine in pure reflex, and something in the chamber made a sound like collective horror. Death, the law whispered. Death, every witness thought. I slid one arm behind her shoulders, lifted her enough to keep her airway open, and pressed my other hand against the luminous nerve line at her throat the physicians had been too afraid to touch. Tell me where, I said. Nobody answered. I looked at the chief physician and barked it again. Tell me where or watch her die. That broke them. Training overrode terror. The physician dropped beside me, hands shaking, directing pressure points. Base of throat, sternum, jawline, temporal ridge. Maintain rhythm. Match pulse. Hold her through the convulsions. So I did. I held the alien queen in my blood-slick human hands while an empire watched its oldest law break in real time. And she lived. Barely. Brutally. But she lived. Her breathing steadied first. Then the convulsions eased. Then her eyes opened, unfocused but alive. Her hand was still gripping mine. No one in that chamber would ever forget it. Neither would I. They arrested me 3 minutes later. Of course they did. Law, after all, is most honest when it is inconvenient. I was treated for the stab wound, under armed guard, stitched, sedated, stabilized, and transferred to a sealed detention chamber beneath the palace. The charge was formal within the hour. Violation of sovereign sanctity, capital sentence pending royal confirmation. Funny thing about saving someone's life, it does not automatically make their legal system less ridiculous. My execution was scheduled for sunrise. Very efficient people, the Nharis. I spent the night alone in a transparent cell overlooking the violet desert, wondering if history would remember me as brave, stupid, or both. I thought about Earth, about wet pavement, after rain, about my mother's hands, always smelling faintly of machine oil, about my sister cursing over anatomy exams, about the absurdity of dying because I had done the one decent thing in reach. Near dawn, the cell doors opened. Queen Serakhti entered alone, alive. Pale, slower than usual, but alive. No crown, no court, no guards, just her. I stood because instinct still outranked common sense. She looked at me for a long moment through the transparent barrier. Then she spoke one command to the warden outside. Leave us. The barrier dissolved. I remember thinking distantly that this was the second time I'd been alone with the most dangerous woman in known space, and somehow the first had felt safer. "You knew the sentence," she said. "Yes. And yet." "And yet?" She studied me in silence. "You touched me," she said, and there was nothing ceremonial in the words now. No outrage, no performance, only quiet disbelief. "You were dying. You touched me anyway." I gave her the only answer I had. Yes. Something moved in her face then, something I had no language for, not because it was alien, because it was too human. "All my life," she said softly. Every hand raised toward me carried fear, ambition, worship, or violence. She stepped closer. "You were the first to touch me with none of them." There are moments that split a life so cleanly you hear the fracture. This was one. She lifted her hand, slowly, deliberately, gave me every chance to misunderstand, then placed her palm against my face. No gloves, no ritual cloth, skin to skin. The Queen of Nharis touched me before witnesses and law and history. Outside the cell, I heard someone gasp. Her thumb brushed the line of my cheek with unbearable gentleness. Then she turned toward the chamber door. "Prepare the court," she said. By noon, half the empire was in political cardiac arrest. The Hall of Tides had never been so full. Nobles, military houses, ministers, foreign delegates, enough witnesses to make truth unavoidable. I stood under armed escort at the center dais. Officially condemned, Queen Serakhti entered in full sovereign regalia, crown blazing, silk dark as deep space. Every inch of her once again, divine and terrible. The charges were read aloud, the law was cited, the punishment was demanded. Then the Queen rose. What she said that day is now taught in 3 legal systems and banned in 2. She did not deny the USA law, she dismantled it. Before court, she declared the oldest interpretation of sovereign sanctity corrupted by fear. She recited ancestral doctrine older than the death clause itself, forgotten language from First Dynasty scripture defining the sovereign body not as untouchable, but as inviolate except by violence. Touch, she declared, was not desecration. Harm was. And by the oldest law, the deeper law, the human had not violated the Queen. He had defended her, protected her, preserved sovereign continuity at cost of his own blood. Then she did something far worse than spare me. She made precedent, by royal decree. Witnessed and sealed, Queen Serakhti abolished capital punishment for unauthorized contact, absent hostile intent. The room nearly rioted. Then she descended from the throne, crossed the chamber, and before every noble house in Nharis, took my hand in hers. No one moved. No one breathed. "This human," she said, her voice carrying to every edge of the hall, placed compassion above fear and truth above law. Let history record that where my court found sacrilege, I found loyalty. Her fingers tightened once around mine. Let history also record, she said, that I was not diminished by being touched. I was saved by it. That was the moment everything changed. Not just for me, for her, for them, for all the cold distances their empire had mistaken for dignity. They called it many things afterward: the hand decree, the breaking of silence, the human incident, if you were a bitter aristocrat. History likes polished names. I remember it more simply, as the day an empire learned touch did not have to mean ownership. My execution was cancelled. Obviously, my contract was not merely renewed, it was rewritten into something unprecedented and politically absurd. Officially, I became royal human liaison to the sovereign court of Nharis. Unofficially, I became the man who had held the Queen's hand and lived. It was not easy after that. Change never is. There were threats, assassination attempts, noble houses, furious at doctrinal erosion, priests foaming about sacrilege, human tabloids inventing 6 impossible romances before breakfast. But law shifted, slowly, painfully, irreversibly. Medical exemptions expanded. Ritual contact rites changed. Child-rearing doctrine softened. Grief customs altered first in private, then in public. A generation of Nharis children grew up seeing comfort where their ancestors had seen weakness. Empires do not transform all at once. They fracture, then bend, then survive as something new. As for me, no, I did not become king. Humanity has many fantasies. That is among its stranger ones. I remained what I had always been, mostly, a practical man in impossible rooms. Still checked exits, still distrusted ceremony, still missed rain on steel and cheap earth coffee and my mother's irritated voice over long-distance comms. But some evenings, when court was done and the palace finally quiet, I would find her beneath the open crystal, arches looking out over the violet dunes, and sometimes when no one else was there to see it, the Queen of Nharis would reach for my hand herself.